In science, can you also have faith in God? For Gregor Mendel, there was no dilemma. He was both a monk and a scientist whose work here at Brno in the Czech Republic laid the foundations of modern genetics. Today, more than 100 years after Mendel, many scientists insist you cannot reconcile the two. Heart of the Matter now asks whether you have to choose between the ideas of science and the ideas of religion. Once, everyone in a society shared the same world view. In Christendom, that view was Christianity, and it was an extreme matter, carrying heavy punishment, to challenge it. When Galileo made discoveries about the solar system, he got into serious trouble with the Vatican. In fact, they only acknowledged he was right in 1992. In the last century, Darwin's view that humans are closely related to apes widened the gap even more, though the world was more tolerant of Darwin. For many, that gap goes on widening. There are scientists today who have no problem combining religious faith and scientific endeavour, but many scientists have pretty absolute views that religion is a superstition we're better off without, and that science is the only rational, viable way of seeking to understand the world. One of the most absolute of all is Richard Dawkins. We asked him to put his case.
People used to think that the very substance from which living things were made was special, was different. When I was an undergraduate, we were taught about a mysterious substance called protoplasm, which was a kind of fundamental mystical slime from which all living things were made. Living substance had its own throbbing life force, a special kind of bubbling energy, a secret ingredient, a factor X, which, as Darwin himself said, was breathed into it by the Creator. Today all is changed utterly, and a terrible beauty is born. There is no warm, mystic, pulsating energy. Living things are made of the same range of atoms as the rest of the cold, dead universe. The only thing special about living matter is the way those atoms are arranged. And the key to that arrangement is digitally coded genes. Life is just bytes and bytes and bytes of digital information. In principle, all the information could be read out of a cell and stored on miles and miles of computer tape, or even volumes and volumes of paper, eventually to be read back into a cell like the divine breath in Ezekiel's Valley of the Bones. I believe that the modern molecular digital gene is a nail in the coffin of the religious worldview. We know all this because of an intellectual revolution, the discovery that genes are made of DNA and that hereditary information is a digital code which is exactly translatable into computer code and vice versa. The chief architects of this mold-breaking revolution in our view of life were Francis Crick and James Watson, who won the Nobel Prize for their achievement in 1962. Watson is a frequent visitor to Britain, and we met recently in Cambridge, where he and Crick did their remarkable work. Well, Jim, for my money, the discovery of the structure of DNA, with all that it implied for genetics, is a good candidate for the most important discovery, scientific discovery of the 20th century. But what actually drove you when you were making it?
I wanted to understand life, and life led first to evolution. You know, some people wanted to explain why we were here in terms of a nice biblical story, which I found silly. And, you know, why would you believe that? And so I wanted to understand evolution, which led me, finally to understanding molecules.
There were many people who didn't believe in the biblical story of creation, but nevertheless wanted to keep a kind of mystical vestige in life. And
yes.
Did you have a sort of feeling that DNA, when you got it, would destroy even that?
I hoped it would, but certainly the past 40 years have shown that it's not as satisfying yet to the general public, even to the educated public, as it is to the scientist who just understands what it is and how really wonderful it is.
There are people who think that religion and science are not in conflict because they're about totally different things. Science is about how things work, and religion is about what it's all for. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think we're for anything. We're just products of evolution, and you can say, gee, your life must be pretty bleak if you don't think there's a purpose. But yeah, I'm anticipating having a good lunch, and
you know, your life's not bleak.
So my life is not at all
mine.
bleak, and you know, human beings I find extraordinarily interesting, and I don't like the idea that you know, we don't take human life seriously.
Do you know many religious scientists?
Virtually none. Occasionally I meet them and I'm a bit embarrassed because, you know, I can't believe that anyone accepts truth by revelation.
Ironically, the seeds of Watson and Crick's revolution were sown by a 19th century Augustinian monk, later abbot of this monastery at Brno, in what is now the Czech Republic. His name was Gregor Mendel, and I made a pilgrimage to the monastery where he did his great work and founded the modern science of genetics. This is Mendel's copy of Darwin's The Origin of Species. We know from his underlinings that he read it carefully, and we also know that he accepted the idea of evolution even before reading it. And why not, many theologians would say. After all, most bishops today accept the fact of evolution. As well they might, for the evidence in its favour is literally overwhelming. They would probably agree with those religious scientists who say something like this: my science and my religion don't come into conflict because they're about different aspects of the same thing. Science is about how things work. Religion is about their ultimate purpose. It baffles me that anyone falls for such an empty, shallow argument. What entitles us to assume that things have an ultimate purpose? Then there are people who cry from the heart, but there must be something more. Surely the universe cannot be nothing but blind physical forces, with no soul, no purpose, no spirit of beauty and creativity. Tell us there is something more. What more do you want? The most beautiful feature of our universe is that it is explicable. It is the great glory of the evolved human brain that we have moved away from stupefied superstition. We don't just gasp at the complexity of the world, we try to understand it. And to a large extent, we succeed. We succeed through constantly questioning, analysing, taking apart, through never being satisfied with mystery, always prepared to change our minds. I'm often asked, what have you got against religion? There are many things I could say, but here in Mendel's Basilica, out of respect for Father Mendel himself, I'll just say one thing, and I think he might have agreed with it. It worries me about religion that it teaches people to be satisfied with not understanding. The spirit of religion is opposed to asking questions, opposed to analysing, opposed to admitting you were wrong and changing your mind in the light of the evidence. The religious mind says, I believe X because X is what the group I belong to believe. That is no way to reach a conclusion. Or, I believe X because I have this deep inner conviction that X is the case. That is no way to reach a conclusion. The scientific mind says, I believe X because I have seen the evidence. That is the proper way to reach a conclusion. Gregor Mendel was a great scientist, and also presumably a religious man. But he was not, I suggest, a great scientist because he was a religious man. As a matter of historic fact, he became a monk because he was a very clever, very poor young man who wanted a career in science, and the nearest he could get to a research grant was a place in a monastery. Nothing about his research suggests that he drew any inspiration from his religion. He seems to have been a scientist through and through. There's a certain kind of mind, I don't think it's unfair to label it the religious mind, which says a mystery, good, something we shall never understand, something we were not meant to understand. There's another kind of mind, the scientific mind, which says a mystery, maybe, but we're working on it.
Joining the Heart of the Matter debate here in the Monastery Library in Brno is an international panel. Baroness Warnock, philosopher and former mistress of Girton College, Cambridge, has chaired many royal commissions and government committees dealing with ethical issues often arising from scientific research. She is a practicing Christian. David Starkey is a British historian and broadcaster with a strong interest in moral issues. He long ago rejected his Quaker background to become an atheist. Professor Wenzel van Heijsteen, originally from South Africa, teaches theology and science at Princeton Theological Seminary in the United States. He strongly believes it's possible to integrate theology and science. Professor Michael Heller, who is Polish, is a Catholic priest and an active scientist researching theoretical physics and cosmology. He teaches at Krakow University, which is where Copernicus was educated. He also sits on the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, a prestigious gathering of scientists to whom the Vatican turns for advice on scientific matters. And Richard Dawkins, a zoologist, is Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University and a best-selling author, whose views we have just heard in the film. It seems we have two different ways of thinking here. We have the religious view, which is about the purpose of life, and we have the scientific view, which is how the world works. Now, David Starkey, does science drive out religion for you?
Well, it can do, but I equally think that the kind of dogmatic opposition of two different positions that Richard sketched was frankly crude. We are here in a religious library. We're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of books which were devoted to that exercise of understanding, reason, argument, making patterns. The view of science that that Richard posited there was a residual view, that science has somehow driven religion out of explanation into a corner of mystery.
Richard Dawkins.
First, let me say that was an 8-minute film, and you can't take in all the wisdom of the ages in an 8-minute film. I believe that there is immense value in studying the wisdom of the past. I love being in this library. I think it's a beautiful library, and I'm sure it'd be wonderful to read all these books. But if you actually want to know why the universe is the way it is and why the world is the way it is, then I do think that science is the way to go.
Wenzel van Heijsteen, is it possible for them to exist in the same mind? Can they live together?
Oh, I of course certainly think so. The reason being the following: I think that in my own mind, what we normally call the pursuit for knowledge, or our quest for intelligibility, or understanding, and for meaning, has much richer resources than only one kind of rationality. And because of that, I think one should be careful to not stereotype what science is, stereotype what religion is, or stereotype the so-called conflict.
Michael Heller, you're both a priest and a scientist. Does a religious person believe that God invented science?
No, science was invented by us, but God invented the universe.
But let me take something that the public would recognise, the account of the origin of the world in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Scientists do not believe that. Do Christians believe it anymore? Do you believe it anymore?
I believe in what the Bible says, the message which it conveys to us. But of course, the picture in which this message is dressed belongs to the past, and there is no problem about that.
Let me ask Mary Warnock, is scientific thinking just a different mode of thinking from the religious thinking?
No, I don't think it's a completely different mode, though partly so. But I do think that religion must not require people to believe things that are actually contradicted by what they know, either scientifically know or know by common sense. It's perfectly possible to be religious and to be historical about the origins of the Bible, for instance, to see where the stories came from. I think the religion is a form of imagination which is enormously dependent on the power of stories.
Richard?
When it comes to what we know, what we understand about the world and the universe, then I like to make a clear distinction between how we know what we know, and I believe that to be scientific, and how we respond to each other, how we respond emotionally to the world. I just don't like confusing these two ways of thinking.
You see, I think Richard is making an important point that I would like to take up. I do think that we shouldn't be contrasting rationality with emotions and everything else, but I do think we should broaden our notion of human rationality to include so much more, the kind of values, the judgments that we do and take, not just when we talk about art or ethics or religion, but also when we do science or when scientists make decisions. All of that is involved, which in a sense makes nonsense of the strict distinction between objectivity and subjectivity, or that science is so clear and religion is so mysterious.
Michael?
And I think that there is no real opposition between science and religion, but between a certain interpretation of science and religion. And what you present is it is not exactly pure science, but it is a highly interpreted science. And that's one point.
I would very much like to agree with what Michael just said there. I think that what Richard is presenting isn't science. It's a litterateur's view of science. It's called scientism. That is to say, the notion of the universal mode of explanation, which I find just as worthy of being distrusted as religion, as a universal mode of explanation. I think what human beings are, let's try and put this very simply, it's not that we're emotional, it's not that we're rational. We are fundamentally pattern-making creatures. We make patterns. Some of these patterns are called poetry, some of them are called mathematics, some of them are called biology. Now,
some of them are called religion.
And some of them are called religion.
You don't have to believe in something just because you need to. You believe in something because there's some reason to believe in it.
No, but for someone that you claim never existed, God seems to have had a powerful place in history. I mean, the actual concept of God has been present in every society.
Absolutely.
But
So
I
what?
think you believe in rationality.
I'm sure we all do, yes.
But why?
Well, it works. Magic carpets.
Technique. You see,
Yes.
I'm sorry, you've got yourself into a complete cul-de-sac. What is the connection between your scientific belief and your emotional life and your sense of fulfillment and your pleasure? It has very little connection at all, apart from the fact that you enjoy your science and make money out of it.
Well, no. You ended your previous statement by saying that science has no explanation for human affairs, human past, the way humans are, why they feel the way they do. Of course it does. We are ultimately going to be explicable in terms of evolution, in terms of how our brains work. Now that, I don't think you can seriously deny that.
Mary Warnock?
Richard assumes that religion offers a different way of explaining or asks a different question about what is the purpose of life. I'm not at all sure that that's an accurate way of designating religion.
Now, I would dispute the statement that religion does not offer an alternative view of the universe. It may be true that among sophisticated modern theologians there is no conflict, but historically, throughout the tradition, and I'm as aware of it as anybody else, of Christianity, it has been a rival cosmology, it's been a rival biology, and to the vast majority of Christians and Muslims and Jews today, it still is.
Yes.
That may not be true.
This is the crisis for religion. It simply got to stop offering an alternative cosmology, and I don't think that in many cases it does, but I think that it's very important that the Christian and Church and Judaism as well should stop offering things which are supposed to be alternatives to science. And I think we've got to learn not to take the statements made thousands of years ago and based on a knowledge of science which was quite different from ours. We've got to stop taking those literally. Should still be religious.
I totally agree with you that historically and even at present there are conflicts between science and religion. And moreover, I predict that such conflicts will arise in the future because the mentality of church people, so to speak, and the scientist people is different.
The evidence today in Brno is that religion is a formidable force. For over 40 years, the communist regime tried to suppress it. Yet since communism fell in 1989, religious faith has blossomed. The abbot of the monastery was ordained in secret under the old regime. By day, he worked as an engineer. Now, each Sunday, his services attract over 1,000 people. What's surprising is that in here, in the monastery's library of some 27,000 volumes, a great many of them are about scientific affairs. Clearly, when Mendel was abbot in 1868, he saw scientific knowledge as no threat to religious faith. So what has set them at loggerheads? What kind of truth does each pursue? The impulse for people to be religious is enormously strong. Is it simply a subjective need that has to be answered, or is it a powerful force in history and in the present? Mary Warnock?
I don't think we ought to say that religion or the morality derived from religion is entirely a matter of subjectivity, because there are insights that I think no one would deny one can get from great literature, say. I think this is a terribly important point, that we mustn't allow scientists to seize the high ground of objective truth as the only kind of truth.
You see, Joan, the really interesting thing is, if you look at Czechoslovakia as it was when it tried to abolish religion, it was a country that sanctified science. It said that it adhered to a thing called scientific socialism. You had a very old-fashioned view of social science with which you tried to explain everything, politics, history, economics. It showed the danger of scientific triumphalism. Above all, it showed the danger of a scientific universality that tries to ignore human and group differences and variety. And when you're looking at the revival of religion in Eastern Europe or in the Islamic world, what you're seeing really is people they're saying, we believe passionately in our difference, in our individuality, our particularity, and that of our groups. And those are needs which, I'm afraid, not all the evolution, not all the science is ever... It may explain, but this is another important distinction, Richard. It will never explain away.
Richard?
I believe that religion, in this discussion, is hijacking two things that it has no right to hijack. One is emotion and poetry, and the other is the deep mystery that lies at the base of all science. Now, there is a lot in science we don't understand, especially physics, as Father Heller will testify. And it is true that some of the greatest physicists of all time have had a deep reverence for something mysterious at the base of the universe.
But wait a minute, I must interrupt you.
It is exactly what I'm saying is that it is a mistake to equate that with religion, because people think that by religion you mean Catholicism or Islam. You do not. You mean something, in this case, very different. This is a physicist's feeling of deep awe, and I have that feeling as well, but it's not religion.
Richard, but in the film, Richard, you said that what you disliked about religious people was that they said a mystery, but scientists said a mystery, good, let's resolve it. Now, this is a fundamental difference that you feel.
No, this is... the mystery I was referring to then was theological mystery, the mystery of the transubstantiation, the mystery of the Trinity. These are held up as mysteries, and you're not allowed to question them, you're not allowed to think about them, not allowed to talk about them.
It is not quite true that you are not allowed to inquire about the mystery of Holy Trinity and Holy Eucharist, because exactly in this library you could find hundreds of volumes on theology just inquiring about that.
All right,
yes.
I think that's a less important
No,
point.
it's not, but there's another thing. You were very scornful, and you said you objected to religion hijacking poetry and hijacking emotion. Does science not, or your sort of science, purport to hijack poetry and hijack emotion? And if it doesn't, what are you telling us?
I do not wish anybody to hijack anything. I want people to recognise and respect that there is poetry and emotion in various different fields, and I feel that science is getting the short end.
This is my point entirely, because
But then what are we talking about? I'm sorry, if that is so, what are we...
What we're talking about, the fact that Richard thinks a lot of religious belief is superstition, and superstition that is damaging. Is that right?
Yes.
Why should we sustain these superstitions?
Well, superstition is already a highly derogatory word. On the other hand, you can interpret all the theological paraphernalia of Christianity as a kind of metaphor rather than the superstition. And I think if one played with that concept rather than the concept of superstition, it was much more helpful. Superstitions are things like, you know, crossing your fingers or touching wood.
Or saying prayers?
No, not necessarily. I don't think so at all. I mean, nobody, I think, who's a seriously religious person thinks that saying a prayer will instantly bring results.
Michael?
Again, I would like to agree, at least partially, with Richard, that in fact, unfortunately, religion in many people, it's very close to superstition. And I think that a great role of science to fulfill with respect to religion is to purify our superstitious approach to religion.
You know, I'm just wondering if you would be willing to see at least basically religion as some form of ritualized behavior that tells us something about the needs. We're back to your predisposition question, which has nothing to do with, you know, whether God exists or not, or whether you can prove that or not, but just what humans need, whether the hope and fear and how that comes together in religion. Whether that would be a valid alternative or not.
If you use the word religion as a label for a sense of awe and wonder, almost of worship of the complexity of the universe and of life, then I am a religious person.
He is a religious man.
Yes, certainly.
What I am not is an adherent of any particular religion, and therefore the things that differentiate it from any other, the things that to me label particular religions, are anything but what I've just said. They are the particular rituals of that religion as opposed to any other. The version of it that you will get from particular religions is impoverished. It's petty. It doesn't live up to the challenge of the real truth.
But it is for you,
it
it
must
isn't
be
for...
so. Because there are things about which you cannot say directly. You must use a kind of metaphor. A very simple example, quantum mechanics. We have a formula, and we understand this formula perfectly well. But if we must translate them into language understandable for ourselves, we are making metaphors.
So you have a metaphor, but it's not a religious metaphor.
But it is very close.
What is the superiority of the popular wonder of science view of the universe to vulgar Christianity? They're both vulgarizations. What is the superiority of the one form of vulgarity, the wonder of science?
That's a matter of taste. If you don't
exactly.
appreciate it,
so all
I
you're
pity
giving,
you.
Richard, all you're giving us then is a comment on your personal aesthetics.
I invite other people to share it for themselves.
Fine,
I write books
fine,
about it.
Then fine.
But then the other dimension that's left out by this kind of crusade against religion is, I think, the moral dimension. And there is a number of people, I think, who need an ideal which can be derived from the figure of Christ, say. And this is something which cannot be derived from science. And so I think that the concept of religion, which after all is part of the popular concept, that it's where ideals and morals come from, can't be left out of account altogether.
When Gregor Mendel was conducting his experiments in the garden here and in the bee house, he can scarcely have imagined the degree to which scientific discoveries would come to challenge the moral framework of society. So, should religion continue to set the guidelines of moral behaviour, or does science now have the right to experiment in total freedom? Mary Warnock, societies need morality in order to function, but do you need a religion in order to have a morality?
Well, in a way, I think they have religion, and a lot of people who reject religion are nevertheless climbing on the back of religion, and from religion they get the moral vocabulary, including things like sin and temptation, which are tremendously powerful notions. But of course, a lot of people who are not religious, who are atheists, are morally good. But the concepts of morality, I think, are, at least still now, in the beginning of the 21st century, very much dependent on the concepts of traditional Christianity.
David, do you agree?
Not fully. I mean, the dominant moral idea of the 20th century is equality, that we ought to treat everybody in the same way. And that is something that was thrust upon Christianity, kicking and screaming by the secular ideas of the Enlightenment in the 18th century. And I think when we sort of make all these grand claims for Christianity, what strikes me, in fact, is how totally different 20th century Christianity is from the Christianity that existed for 1900 years. It's a Christianity which has made its accommodation with a modern, scientific, secular world. And it's in that scientific and secular world that any kind of moral standards are to be sought.
Then, Sir Van Heinstein, do you need religion to know right from wrong?
Well, I wouldn't say that you need a religion to know right from wrong, but what I would say is that for us to decide what is right and wrong, we are necessarily all socialized into communities. And these communities have or may not have strong and influential religious traditions. But just because there is no one big religion out there, even Christianity is so completely fragmented, and that is why it is impossible to directly derive right or wrong from that.
Richard, what do you think?
There is a risk that if you sweep away anything that has been a dominant force in the culture of a people, that there will be a vacuum, and who knows what may fill it. I think I should prefer myself to see a society in which we sit down together and talk about our morals, what we think our norms should be, rather than derive them from...
Do you think agreement could be reached?
Well, I'm worried about deriving our morals from authority or revelation or tradition, partly because all the traditions are different, sometimes mutually contradictory.
They're not very different. Most religions approximate to something, to a certain number of the Ten Commandments, for example.
I do think one ought to be careful not to exaggerate the difference between different moralities and indeed different religions. Human values derive from the sort of things that humans like and the sort of things they hate and fear. And those are largely common to all humans. So I think one can get into terrible trouble by saying...
Michael, let me bring Michael in here. Michael, are you fearful that if religion is sidelined, if it declines, then morality will be up for grabs?
I would like to remind you a very famous saying of Dostoevsky: if there is no God, everything is permitted. And I think it is a very deep meaning of that phrase. Even coming back to our earlier discussion, at the bottom of science there is a moral choice, the choice of rationality. And if there is no God, there is no difference between false and truth, good and right, then it would be better to kill my opponent instead of discuss with him.
But what was your experience of the communist world in which there was an attempt to do away with God? Did you find that anything was allowed?
To a great extent, everything was allowed. If you look at the recent history of Russia, and if you count the number of graves, millions and millions, I think everything was allowed.
But science, too, was persecuted in Russia.
Yes, that's true.
I mean,
because it was a false pseudoscience, which was...
Mendel became a dirty word,
yes.
Mendelism became a dirty word.
Relativistic cosmology, formal logic was prohibited.
Lots of geneticists in the Mendelian tradition were persecuted. Many of them lost their lives. I don't think we should necessarily use the Russian example as an example of what happens when you lose God. Russia lost science as well in a very real sense, although they called themselves scientific.
You can put upside down your argument. If you lose God, you lose science as well.
Isn't the real point that what Russia did was simply what Russia had always had, which was mere arbitrariness, utter arbitrariness as a form of government? Russia, in one sense, was simply continuing its political history. But the key question is, isn't it, what sort of morality do we want in a democratic age? It would be nice to think that we could have a more rational morality in which we called upon a wider range of traditions. It is extraordinarily difficult, and we will have to recognise that if we are to have such a morality, it will be a very minimal morality. It will be a morality that has a golden rule, which is not even the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but rather do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. And we are really going to have to recognise that this new democratic, scientific world is going to require a massive restructuring of our relations with each other. And simply to invoke science as a solution or religion as a solution will be deadly, literally.
Let's turn to Richard and talk about science and the morality of science, because people are pointing the finger at science and saying, where's the responsibility here? Science keeps on making all these huge advances without a moral awareness of the consequences.
If you want to do good, science is a very powerful way of doing it, and if you want to do evil, science is a very powerful way of doing it. It is a very, very powerful weapon to do anything, and therefore it's all the more important where science is concerned to think about the moral consequences of what you're doing. It's not just the responsibility of the scientists to do it, although they bear a responsibility as well. I reiterate that I would like to live in a society in which we talk about the sort of society we would like to live in, and that thereby we frame our norms, our customs, our morals, and we come to some sort of agreement. We do not say a particular authoritative individual says that such and such is immoral. I belong to his party, therefore I believe it too.
But there is a danger here, because science is so competitive that the morally responsible scientist who sees danger ahead, who might restrain his own research, will be simply knocked aside in the stampede to develop
this is
faster and faster.
Why one needs, in some cases, one needs legislation which is based on a kind of consensus morality. And if legislation is not based on that, then of course it won't work. It won't be capable of being enforced.
David?
Our real trouble is that if we have a morality at all, it is this strange thing which is a kind of instinct or vote, and much of the time we actually bizarrely turn to moral arbiters like Mary here, backed by an Act of Parliament. And the notion that an Act of Parliament with all those dim MPs on both sides actually determines what's right and wrong. But maybe that is all we can have in the sort of society we have.
So finally, Wenzel, do you see science galloping ahead and the need for morality to chase after it?
Well, yes and no. I think science galloping ahead should be a tremendous challenge for theologians within the specific context to throw off their ideological fetters and to revision the way they think about so much of their metaphors, their doctrines, their morals, their morality. And in that sense, it's a direct challenge and I think a very creative situation.
Richard, what do you think?
I should like to say something as a Darwinian, that I think that we get our immorality largely from our Darwinian past. We get our selfishness, we get our drive for self-interest, for ruthlessness, for cruelty perhaps. And I think that one of the things that I would say if I was sitting around the table trying to come to some agreement about morality is that the first thing we should do is to throw out Darwinism. We should regard Darwinian natural selection as a great evil. It's out there, it's true, it's what is causing the whole living world to be the way it is, including ourselves, and we humans uniquely have the power to gainsay it, uniquely have the power to say we can throw off our Darwinian past, and using our conscious brains, which may be almost unique, we can make a world which is anti-Darwinian as far as morality is concerned, though of course we will remain Darwinian as far as our understanding for how the world of life got to be the way it is.
Next week, Heart of the Matter debates the way society treats sex offenders. That's next Sunday at the later time of 10:50 here on BBC One.